Chapter 11 Poking the Ghost King, the Crown Prince Seeks Truth. Crimson Rain-Sought Flower, Shalian asked. Your Royal Highness the Crown Prince, Sanlung replied. Shalian finally turned around with a grin. That's the first time I've heard you address me like that. The red-clad youth sat on the mat and propped up a leg, also grinning. How does it feel? Shalian gave it a thought and replied truthfully. It feels a little different than when others call me by that title. How so? Huacheng asked. Shalian tilted his head, his eyes squinting a little. It's hard to say. It's just... When others called him Your Highness, some were emotionless and all business, like Ling Wen. But most of the time, when people called him Your Highness, it was laced with a sense of disdain, like how one would intentionally address an ugly woman as a beauty, somewhat sarcastic. Yet, when Huacheng called him Your Highness, the two words were uttered with grave sincerity. So while it was hard to describe, Shalian felt that when Huacheng called him Your Highness, it was different from when others used that title. He continued, That night at Mount Yujun, the groom who whisked me away was you, right? Huacheng smiled deep and meaningfully, and that made Shalian realize his words may have been too ambiguous. He quickly corrected himself. I meant the groom in disguise who led me away was you, right? I wasn't disguising myself as a groom, Huacheng replied. Technically speaking, Huacheng wasn't wrong. The young man at the time never said he was the groom or anything. In fact, he didn't say anything at all. He only stopped in front of the marriage sedan and extended his hand. It was Shalian who went with him willingly. Fine. Then, why did you appear like that? Shalian asked. This question only has two possible answers, Huacheng said. First, that I came specifically for your Royal Highness. Second, that I was passing by and was free. Which do you think is more believable? Shalian counted the number of days Huacheng had spent with him and replied earnestly, Which is more believable I can't say, but you do seem to have a lot of free time. His entire person and his gaze both circled around Huacheng, going back and forth, and after a long while he said, You're quite different from what the rumors say. Huacheng changed his sitting position, but with a hand still propping up his cheek, he watched Shalian and asked, Oh, and how did your Royal Highness figure out that I am Crimson Rain-Sought Flower? The images of that umbrella dripping with blood, that gently clinking silver chain, and those cold silver vibrances filled Shalian's mind. He thought, It's not like you were trying very hard to hide yourself. Even after all the probing, you gave nothing away, so you must be a supreme. You're dressed in all red like maples, like blood, and seem to know everything, seem to be capable of everything, and know no fear. And such magnanimity, other than Crimson Rain-Sought Flower, who all the heaven officials fear, there didn't seem to be anyone else you could be. Huacheng laughed. May I take those words as a compliment? Can't you tell they're compliments? Shalian thought. Sparing so many words, how come your Royal Highness doesn't question my motives in coming close to you? Huacheng asked, his smile curved somewhat. If you didn't want to say anything, and I asked, would you tell? Or you might not tell me the truth, Shalian said. That's not necessarily true, Huacheng said. Besides, you can always kick me out. Shalian replied, You're so powerful, even if I kicked you out now, if you really wanted to do something bad, wouldn't you just change your skin and come back? The two met eyes and grinned. Suddenly, a small knocking noise broke the temporary silence in the shrine. They looked to where the sound came from, and there wasn't anyone, only that small, black clay pot rolling on the ground. It was the same pot Ban Yue was tucked in. Shalian had casually placed it next to the mat, but somehow it had tipped itself over and rolled to the door. Blocked by the wooden door built by Huacheng, it started hitting the door by rolling into it repeatedly. Shalian was worried it might break itself, so he opened the door, and the little clay pot rolled into the grass field outside. Shalian followed behind it and saw that once the little clay pot made it to the grass field, it stood itself up. Even if it was only a pot, it gave the impression that it was gazing at the night sky. Huacheng also emerged from the shrine, and Shalian called out to the pot, Ban Yue, are you awake? Thankfully, when they returned from the Gobi, it was already deep into the night. Otherwise, if anyone had seen Shailian ask a pot how it was doing, they would probably make a huge fuss again. A moment later, the sulky voice of a girl came from the pot. General Hua. Shailian sat down next to it. Ban Yue, have you rolled out here to stargaze? Why don't you come out? Hua Cheng was leaning against a tree next to them and said, She only just left the Ban Yue ruins. Probably best if she stays in there for a while longer. After all, Ban Yue had stayed in Ban Yue for 200 years, and the sudden change of environment might be hard to adjust to. Shailian said, Then you'd best stay in there for a while longer and heal. This is where I train, so you don't have to worry about anything else. The pot shook twice as if trying to say something. After chewing on his words, Shailian said, Ban Yue, the incident this time actually didn't concern you. Your scorpion snakes were... General Hua, I couldn't move at the time, but I heard everything, Ban Yue said. Shailian was taken aback. Only then did he learn that Pei Shou only sealed Ban Yue's movements, not her senses. Just as well. If she heard everything, it was just as well. The clay pot asked, General Hua, what will happen to General Pei Jr.? Shailian crossed his arms in his sleeves. I don't know, but wrongdoings will always be punished. Another moment of silence. The pot shook twice, and Shailian finally understood that the shaking was a nod in agreement. General Pei Jr. is actually not a bad person, Ban Yue said. Is that right? Ban Yue replied. He's helped me before. Somehow, many more memories suddenly came back to Shailian. Ban Yue often received beatings, and in the words of other young and children, she bore a face that asked for it. It took a long time after Shailian met her before he learned of this, since no matter how many beatings Ban Yue received, she wouldn't tell anyone. It wasn't until one day when Shailian saw a group of children pressing her face into the mud that he learned where all those bruises on her face came from. But when he asked her about it some time afterwards, she only remembered that she had to wash the handkerchief from the boy who pulled her out of the mud pit before she returned it, and nothing else. She remembered none of the ones who beat her, but the ones who'd saved her once she remembered for a lifetime. Ban Yue continued, Although Kimo always said scornfully that I had my mind possessed, that I had been completely used, whether General Pei used me or not, I know it was my own will to open the city gates. Shailian didn't know what to say anymore, but he could feel some part of his heart soften. A moment later, he patted that clay pot. All right, it's all in the past. Oh, by the way, Ban Yue, the name Hua Shui is fake, and I haven't been a general for a long time. You don't have to keep calling me General Hua. Then how should I address you? Ban Yue asked. That was actually a good question. If Ban Yue called him Your Highness seriously, it'd feel weird. Shailian didn't really care about his address either. He just wanted to change the subject. That's up to you. I suppose it's okay if you keep calling me General Hua. Only, there was another here with the surname Hua, so that might cause some confusion. But then he thought Hua Shui was a fake name he took from the first word of the title Flower-Crowned Martial God, so Hua Cheng may very well be a fake name too. That they both coincidentally picked the same word, flower, for a surname was rather interesting. I'm sorry, General Hua, Ban Yue said again. Shailian turned back to look at her and said woefully, Ban Yue, why are you always apologizing to me? Did he really look that sorry to people? From within the pot, Ban Yue declared, I want to save the common people. Shailian was speechless. General Hua, you said that once, Ban Yue said. Shailian was speechless and confused. He quickly pressed down on the clay pot. Wait, hold on a second. Wait for what? Ban Yue asked. Shailian snuck a glimpse at Hua Cheng, who was still leaning against the tree with his arms crossed, and said in a low voice, Did I really say that? That was his favorite saying when he was only 10-something years old. In the many centuries thereafter, he shouldn't have uttered those words at all, so hearing them so suddenly made it difficult to accept. However, Ban Yue was firm. General, those were your words. Shailian still wanted to argue. I don't think so. Ban Yue told him sternly and coldly, "Oh no, you did say them. There was a time when you asked us all what we wanted to do when we were older. Everyone answered, and afterward, you said, 'My dream since I was little was to save the world, the common people.' So that was it. Ban Yue, why would you remember something so clearly, said completely randomly?" Ban Yue was confused. Randomly? But General Hua, I thought those words were said very earnestly. Shailian gazed up at the night sky, feeling helpless. Really? Maybe. I don't remember whatever else I might have said. You also said, "Do what you think is right," Ban Yue told him. "Nothing can block your way. Even if you fall in the mud 100 times, you must get up with determination." And a lot more similar sayings. He didn't need to look back to know that it was definitely Hua Cheng under the tree who laughed at that. Even smothering the pot now wouldn't help. Shailian thought, what nonsense. Why did I keep saying those kinds of things? I'm nothing like that, am I? But I don't know what's right anymore, Ban Yue said. Shailian froze at those words. I wanted to do as General Hua said and save the people, Ban Yue continued. But in the end, I destroyed the kingdom of Ban Yue. Her voice was lost, and it seemed that no matter what I did, the results were all horrible. General Hua, I know I didn't do things right, but can you tell me, where did I go wrong? How can I do as you said and save the common people? Shailian replied, I'm sorry, Ban Yue. How to save the world, the common people? I didn't know the answer to that question back then, and even now, I still don't. Ban Yue was silent for a moment, then said dejectedly, General Hua, to be honest, it feels like for the past 200 years I've had no idea what I'm doing. I'm such a failure. Hearing her, Shailian became more depressed, thinking, doesn't that make me even more of a failure? And I've lived for 800 years too. Shailian left the little ghost Ban Yue in the pot to stargaze alone and calm down. He went back inside Puchi's shrine with Hua Cheng. After closing the door, Shailian suddenly spoke up. Ban Yue remained at Ban Yue Pass willingly. It wasn't because she became a rat that she was trapped there. She always remembered that it was she who opened the city gates and had never given any excuse, like saying she was doing it for the people. It was to help the Ban Yue soldiers vent their resentment, so they could leave this world sooner, that she allowed Chemo to lead them to murder her over and over. Shailian shook his head. If General Pei Jr. really didn't want to leave those Ban Yue soldiers behind, and also didn't want the heavens to find out, he could have easily sent a clone to secretly descend and take care of them. Why didn't he do it this way instead? Clones don't have the same amount of power, Hua Cheng said. You saw how Pei Shu's clone Ah Zhao was. He couldn't take care of so many Ban Yue soldiers, so feeding them the living was the fastest and easiest way to disperse their resentment. Why did it have to be so fast, Shailian wondered. Maybe it's so little Ban Yue wouldn't have to hang so pitifully as many times, Hua Cheng replied. Shailian was silent for a moment. But what about the mortals? Hua Cheng replied quietly. They're heavenly officials. Mortals are nothing but ants in their eyes. Pei Shou is a classic, highly ranked god. As long as no one found out, killing a few hundred people is no different than stomping a few hundred insects to death. Shailian glanced at him and recalled that when Sanlung jumped into the sinner's pit, he wiped out all the Ban Yue soldiers in a flash. He turned to him and said, Clones don't have the same amount of power. I see your clone is pretty powerful. Hua Cheng arched his brow. It would be, but I'm the real thing. Shailian turned to look at him, somewhat surprised. Huh? This is your true form? 100% authentic, Hua Cheng declared. If anything must be blamed, it would have to be the look on Hua Cheng's face, like he was welcoming Shailian to test it out himself. Without thinking, Shailian raised a finger and poked Hua Cheng's face. After poking, Shailian snapped back to himself in shock, yelping, "Oh no!" in his head. He was only curious to see what a Supreme Ghost King's fake skin would feel like, but apparently his body moved faster than his mind and poked him. How extremely outrageous of him. To have someone suddenly poke him, Hua Cheng looked somewhat shocked too, but he was always calm and collected, so his expression cleared instantly. He didn't say anything, but his arched brows raised even higher, as if waiting for Shailian to explain. The laughter in his eyes was apparent. Of course Shailian couldn't explain himself. He looked at his own finger, then hid it away, betraying nothing of his thoughts. Not bad. Hua Cheng finally burst out laughing, and he crossed his arms with his head tilted. What's not bad? Do you mean this skin? Yeah, it's quite good, Shailian said sincerely. But what? Hua Cheng asked. Shailian stared at his face and studied it for a moment, then finally said, But can I see your real face? Since he said, this skin, that meant that while this body was his true form, the skin wasn't his real one, and this appearance was not his true face. This time, Hua Cheng didn't respond immediately, and dropped his arms. Maybe it was all in Shailian's head, but Hua Cheng's eyes dimmed a little, and Shailian's heart tightened despite himself. When the air froze, Shailian knew this question may have crossed the line. Although, for the past few days, the two of them had gotten along well, that didn't mean they were so close that he could make this type of request. Without waiting for his response, Shailian quickly smiled. I was just asking. Don't take it to heart. Hua Cheng closed his eyes, and a moment after, he smiled softly. I'll let you see it someday, if there's a chance. If anyone else said that, it'd naturally be perfunctory. Someday usually meant, please forget it. But it was Hua Cheng who said it, so Shailian felt someday meant someday, and it would surely happen. That made him even more curious, and he grinned. Then I'll wait till the day you feel it's okay to show me. Let's rest for now. After bustling about for half the night, Shailian had long since tossed the idea of cooking to the back of his mind and returned to lying on the straw mat. Hua Cheng also lay down next to him. No one bothered questioning why, after coming clean about their identities, a god and a ghost could still lie together on a crappy mat, laughing and chatting. The straw mat didn't have pillows, so Hua Cheng used his arms, and Shailian imitated him in pillowing his head on his arms too. He mentioned casually, The ghost realm seems so idle. Don't you guys ever need to report back to anyone? Hua Cheng not only used his arms as a pillow, but he propped his leg up too. He replied, Report to whom? I'm the biggest one there is. Besides, we all mind our own business. No one bothers anyone. So the ghost realm was made up of many disorganized bands of lost souls and feral ghosts. Shailian replied, Is that so? I thought it'd be like the upper court, with a central government. If it's like that, have you met any other ghost kings before? I have, Hua Cheng said. Even green ghost Qirong? You mean that lowly vulgar trash? Well, what do I say to that? Shailian thought. Yes? No? Thankfully, he didn't need to say anything, as Hua Cheng continued. I greeted him, and he ran away. Shailian had a hunch that this greeting couldn't have been your regular sort of greeting. Sure enough, Hua Cheng said casually, And then I received the moniker Crimson Rain-Sought Flower. So, before, when he mentioned wiping out the lair of another ghost, he was talking about green ghost Qirong, and this greeting was carnage. What an extraordinary greeting, Shailian thought, rubbing his chin. Do you have something against the green ghost Qirong? Yeah, Hua Cheng replied. What's that? Can't stand his face. Shailian didn't know whether to laugh or cry, thinking, Did you challenge those 33 heavenly officials because you also didn't like their faces? The officials of the upper court all call him vulgar, and even the ghost realm scorns him. Is that true? It's true. Even Blackwater is disgusted with him, Hua Cheng replied. Who's Blackwater? Shailian asked, then recalled. Oh, is that the one called Ship-Sinking Blackwater? That's right. He's also known as the Black Water Demon Xuan. Shailian remembered this Black Water Demon Xuan was also a supreme, but Green Ghost Qirong was only almost a supreme, and just there for the head count. He asked, interested, Are you close with this Demon Xuan? No, Hua Cheng replied lazily. There aren't many ghosts in the ghost realm I'm close with. Now Shalian was amazed. Is that so? I thought you'd have many subordinates. Maybe our definition of close is different. Wachung quirked his brow. Yeah, in the ghost realm, those lower than supreme have no right to speak to me. It was an exceedingly arrogant statement, but Wachung made it sound so indisputable and self-evident, Shalian smiled softly. You have it pretty good in the ghost realm. It's only so big, not like the heavens. I can barely remember the heavenly officials in the upper court, and there are many more waiting to ascend in the middle court. It's like an ocean of names. What good is it to remember them? Don't bother. It's a waste of your brain, Wachung said. It's kind of offensive if you can't remember their names. Heavenly officials loved their reputations. Wachung clicked his tongue. If they can be offended by such a small thing, then they're nothing but narrow-minded trash. After chatting that much, Shalian didn't want to dig too deeply into the subject, lest they touch on something sensitive, so he changed the topic away from the differences between the two realms. He glanced at the closed wooden door and wondered, Ban Yue, that child, I wonder when she'll come back in. The bold words, I want to save the common people, returned and reverberated in his head, pouring a mess of images in his mind, and Shalian had to forcibly push them down. Just then, Wachung spoke up. Those were good words. Which ones? Shalian asked. I want to save the world, the common people, Wachung replied leisurely. Shalian was thunderstruck. He flipped over and curled into a shrimp, wishing for another pair of arms so he could cover both his face and his ears. He groaned. Sanlong. Wachung seemed to have nudged closer and deadpanned right behind him. What's wrong with those words? Wachung wouldn't back down, and Shalian couldn't win against him, so he flipped back over and said helplessly, It's silly. What's there to be afraid of, Wachung said. To dare speak of the people of the world, whether to save or to destroy them, is admirable. The former is harder than the latter, so it's even more respectable. Shalian shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. If you dare to speak, you have to be able to follow through and actually achieve it. He had laid an arm over his eyes. Oh, all right. I suppose that's nothing. What Ban Yue said was already pretty good. I've said sillier things when I was even younger. Wachung laughed. Oh? Like what? Let's hear it. Shalian was pensive for a moment, and he smiled softly as he chased his memories. Many, many years ago, there was someone who told me they couldn't live on anymore. They asked me for the reason they were alive, and what was the meaning of their life. He glanced at Wachung. Do you know how I answered? It might have just been Shalian's imagination, but there seemed to be a light in Wachung's eyes. He asked softly, How did you answer? Shalian said, I told them, if you don't know how to live on anymore, then live for me. If you don't know the meaning of your life, then make me that meaning, and use me as your reason to live. As Shalian spoke, he couldn't help but let out a small laugh and shook his head. Even now I don't understand what I was thinking back then. How did I ever have the courage to tell someone to make me the meaning of their life? Wachung was silent, and Shalian continued. It really was something that only could have been said back then. Long ago, I really thought I was invincible and fearless. If you asked me to say the same words now, there is no way they would ever leave my lips again. Shalian continued slowly. I don't know what happened to that person afterward, but to become someone's reason to live is already a heavy responsibility. How dare I speak of the world? Silence blanketed Puchi's shrine. After a while, Sanlung said quietly, Something like saving the common people. It really doesn't matter how you do it, but although brave, it's foolish. Yeah, Shalian agreed. Wachung continued, Although foolish, it's brave. Shalian grinned. Thanks. You're welcome, Wachung said. The two stared at the holy ceiling of Puchi's shrine in amiable silence, and Wachung spoke up again after a while. You know, Your Highness, we've only known each other for a few days. Is it all right for you to say so much to me? Well, Shalian huffed, what's the problem? Whatever. Those who have known each other for decades can become strangers in a day. We met by chance, and we may part by chance. If we like each other, then we shall continue to meet. If we don't, then we shall part. At the end of the day, there's no banquet in the world that doesn't come to an end, so let's take it easy, and I'll say what I want to say." Hua Cheng seemed to have chuckled, then suddenly he said, "If—" Shalian turned his head to face him. "If?" Hua Cheng didn't turn around, but continued to stare at the dilapidated ceiling of the shrine, and Shalian could only see this handsome young man's left profile. Hua Cheng said softly, "If I was ugly?" "Huh?" Shalian gaped. Hua Cheng finally turned his head slightly. "If my true appearance is ugly, would you still want to see it?" Shalian was taken aback. "Is it? Although there's no real reason. I never thought your true appearance would be too horrible looking." "Who knows?" Hua Cheng said, half jokingly. "What if I'm discolored, disfigured, ugly, monstrous, and horrible? What will you do?" At first, Shalian thought this line of inquiry was rather fascinating. So the overlord of the ghost realm, the one called the devil incarnate, and feared by all in the heavens, would care about his looks? But when he thought about it deeply, he didn't think it was very funny anymore. He vaguely recalled, in the many rumored backstories of Hua Cheng, one said that he was a disfigured child from birth, or something along those lines. If that was true, then he must have grown up discriminated against by others. Maybe that was why he was particularly sensitive about his appearance. Thus Shalian chewed on his words. "Well," he used his warmest, most sincere voice. "To be honest, the reason I want to see your true appearance is only because, you see, we're already like this." "Hmm?" Hua Cheng piped up. "Like what?" "Well, we're sort of friends now, right? So if we're friends, then we should be honest with each other. My wanting to see your true appearance has nothing to do with how you look. You asked what I would do, but of course I won't do anything. Don't worry, as long as it's your real face, I'm sure I'll—" "Why are you laughing? I'm being serious." When Shalian reached the last part, he could feel the youth next to him shaking. He froze for a moment at first and thought, "Are my words so moving that he's touched like this?" and was too embarrassed to turn around to see. But after a while, the soft laughter from next to him very obviously leaked out. Shalian felt rather deflated, and placed a hand on his shoulder to give it a little push. "Sanleng, why are you laughing so much? Did I say something wrong?" Hua Cheng immediately stopped shaking and turned around. "No, you're very right." Shalian felt even more deflated at those words. "You're so insincere." "I promise, you won't find another person more sincere than me in this world," Hua Cheng replied. Shalian didn't want to talk anymore and flipped over, his back facing Hua Cheng. "Forget it. Time to sleep. Don't talk." Hua Cheng chuckled again, then said, "Next time." Even though he was determined to sleep, hearing Hua Cheng speak, Shalian couldn't resist replying. "What's next time?" Hua Cheng whispered, "The next time we meet. I will use my true appearance to greet you." There was much to ponder about those words, and Shalian should have kept questioning him. But after a long night, an unstoppable drowsiness overtook him, and he couldn't hang on, falling into a deep slumber. The next morning, when Shalian woke, the spot next to him was already empty. He scrambled to get up and walked around the shrine in a daze. When he opened the door, there were no figures to be seen outside. It seemed like it was true. The youth had indeed left. However, the fallen leaves had been swept into a pile, and next to that pile stood a small clay pot. Shalian took the pot inside and placed it on the altar. Right then, he suddenly noticed that there seemed to be something extra on his usually bare chest. He raised his hand to touch it, and found, just below the cursed collar, there was an exceedingly thin chain, hanging loose and light. Shalian immediately removed it from his neck. Turned out it was a silver chain, so thin and light that he hadn't felt anything on him before, and dangling from the chain there was a crystal clear ring.